What would you do if someone stole the seat you paid for and the airline told you to move? Picture this. You've just finished a grueling week of meetings, the kind where your phone never stops buzzing, your calendar is stacked from sunrise to sundown, and even your coffee feels like it needs coffee. That was the week David Langston had in Phoenix, Arizona. He was ready to shut it all off. No calls, no emails, just him, a window seat, and a few hours of silence before finally making it home to Dallas. Except this wasn't going to be that flight. David arrived at Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport early, something he always did. He hated rushing. He liked walking slow, scanning the terminal, listening to the chatter of families wrangling kids, couples bickering over gate changes, business people with heads buried in laptops. Airports were their own little worlds, and he'd learned long ago that you could read a lot about society just by watching how people treated each other in those in-between spaces. He rolled his leather carry-on behind him, checked the monitor to confirm his gate, and headed toward the Delta Sky Lounge. As a frequent flyer and a man of means, he could afford the luxury, but he didn't flaunt it. He didn't wear flashy watches or loud suits. Today, he was in a gray polo, dark jeans, and sneakers. Simple, comfortable. But if you looked closely, you'd see the quiet confidence in the way he moved. Inside the lounge, David grabbed a coffee and sat by the window. He pulled out his phone, glanced at the headlines, and chuckled when a news article caught his eye. Something about an airline CEO apologizing for overbooking fiascos. He shook his head. "They never learn," he muttered under his breath. 10 minutes later, his phone buzzed with a boarding alert. He drained the last of his coffee, adjusted his jacket, and made his way toward the gate. Boarding had just started, and as usual, people were crowding the lanes, even though their groups hadn't been called yet. He sighed, tightened his grip on the handle of his carry-on, and scanned the boarding area. That's when he noticed her, a woman in her mid-40s, blonde hair cut neatly to her shoulders, pearl earrings, a cream-colored blazer. She had the look of someone who was used to getting her way, confident, maybe a little too much. She was standing near the first-class line, glancing down at her phone, occasionally tapping her foot impatiently. David didn't think much of it. Just another passenger, eager to get on board. When his group was called, David stepped forward, handed his phone to the gate agent, and was waved through. He walked the jet bridge calmly, grateful to be minutes away from sitting down. His first-class seat, 2A window, was waiting. That seat wasn't just a piece of fabric to him. It represented something earned. Long hours, late nights, sacrifices. He had built his tech company from scratch, endured skepticism, fought through barriers. And now, that seat was his small piece of peace. But peace, as he was about to find out, was not on the menu today. Because when David stepped onto the plane and turned toward his row, his seat, 2A, was already occupied. And not by accident. But before we get into that heated moment, let's sit with David for a second longer. Because the real storm is only beginning. David paused in the aisle, blinking once as if his eyes had played a trick on him. Row 2, window seat. His seat. But sitting there, already settled with her handbag tucked neatly against the side and a glass of sparkling water in hand, was the same woman he'd noticed at the gate. She looked up, gave him a polite half-smile, and then went back to scrolling on her phone. No hesitation, no sign of realizing she was in the wrong spot. David cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said calmly. "I think you might be in my seat." "That's 2A, right?" The woman glanced at him again, her smile tightening. "I'm in 2A, she replied confidently, as though the conversation was already over. David tilted his head slightly, keeping his voice even. "I don't think so. My boarding pass says 2A. You might want to double-check yours." For a split second, she hesitated, but then her posture stiffened. She held up her phone with the mobile boarding pass displayed. "It says 2A right here," she announced, loud enough for the man in the aisle behind David to raise an eyebrow. David leaned closer. He didn't want to cause a scene. He studied the screen quickly, except it didn't say 2A. It clearly said 3C, middle seat, a completely different row. He took a breath. "That says 3C, not 2A. The woman frowned, as if she hadn't heard him correctly. Then she chuckled softly, the kind of laugh people use when they think the other person is being ridiculous. No. That's not right. I always fly in 2A. David blinked again. Always? Seats don't come assigned to people for life. They change every flight. She crossed her arms, phone still in hand. Look, maybe they made a mistake when they printed the ticket. But this is my seat. By now, a couple of first-class passengers were watching, their eyes darting between David and the woman. The air in the cabin grew heavier, like everyone was holding their breath. David kept his composure. He had learned early in life that raising his voice often worked against him, no matter how justified. Calm, deliberate words carried more weight. Ma'am, I don't want to argue with you, but the boarding pass says 3C. My ticket says 2A. I'd appreciate it if you could move so we can all get settled. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Well, maybe you should sit in 3C then. Problem solved. That did it. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Someone whispered, "That's not how it works." Another shook his head in disbelief. David straightened up, his hand tightening on the strap of his bag. He thought of all the times in boardrooms when he had to fight to prove he belonged, when people assumed he was someone's assistant instead of the founder, when respect had to be wrestled from those who gave it freely to others. This felt like another one of those moments, small on the surface, but carrying the weight of 1,000 past slights. He leaned in slightly, his voice firm but not raised. With all due respect, I paid for 2A. That's my seat. I'm not moving. Before she could answer, a flight attendant appeared, smiling too brightly, the kind of smile used to calm, tense passengers. Is there a problem here? David exhaled slowly. Yes, this woman is sitting in my seat. The attendant looked between the two of them, then at the boarding passes, and for a moment, David caught it. The hesitation, the flicker in her eyes, the unspoken calculation about who she believed first. But instead of resolving it quickly, the attendant's next words only made things worse, and the tension in the cabin ticked up another notch. The flight attendant, a woman in her early 30s with a name tag that read Kelly, leaned slightly toward Caroline first. Ma'am, can I see your boarding pass again? Caroline handed over her phone with a sigh, as if the whole ordeal was beneath her. I already told him, she said, gesturing toward David. This is my seat. Kelly studied the pass. Her smile never faded, but there was a pause before she spoke. Okay, it looks like your seat is 3C, not 2A. David nodded, finally, some clarity. But Caroline didn't budge. She tilted her head and gave Kelly a look that said, You know I'm right, don't you? That must be a mistake. I always sit near the front. I booked first class weeks ago. Kelly kept her professional tone. Yes, ma'am, 3C is also in first class, but 2A is assigned to this gentleman. She turned toward David. Sir, can I see your boarding pass as well? David handed it over without hesitation. Kelly scanned it, then returned it to him with a polite nod. Yes, 2A is correct. Case closed. Or so it should have been. Caroline's smile vanished, replaced by a sharp edge. I don't understand. Why should I move? I'm already comfortable here. Can't he just take 3C? It's not a big deal. David felt a familiar pressure building in his chest, the kind that came from years of having to justify his presence in spaces he'd worked hard to enter. He glanced at Kelly, waiting for her to set things straight, but instead of insisting Caroline move, Kelly hesitated. Well, she began softly, maybe, just for today, you could take 3C, sir. That way we can keep the boarding process smooth and avoid any delays. The words landed heavy. A few passengers shifted in their seats, eyes wide. Everyone knew what had just happened. Kelly was siding with convenience over fairness, and Caroline's entitled smile had returned instantly. David stared at Kelly, then back at Caroline, then at the passengers who were watching closely now. He took a breath, steady, deliberate. So, let me get this straight, he said slowly, his voice low but carrying. She takes my seat. You confirm it's mine. And instead of asking her to move, you want me to leave? Kelly's smile faltered. I'm just trying to make this easier for everyone. Caroline cut in, emboldened. Exactly. Why make a fuss? It's just a seat. You'll still be in first class. David tilted his head. It's not just a seat. It's about respect. I followed the rules. I paid for this spot. And now you're telling me it doesn't matter? The silence in the cabin thickened. A man across the aisle muttered, He's right. A woman in the back added, This isn't fair. But Caroline crossed her arms, digging in. I've been a loyal Delta customer for 15 years. I don't think one little mistake should ruin my flight. David let out a dry laugh. Funny, I've been a loyal customer too. And on top of that, I happen to own stock in this airline. So maybe I have just as much right to expect respect. That got Caroline's attention. Her eyes flickered, but she still didn't move. Oh, please. Everyone says they're an investor these days. Kelly looked trapped, caught between trying to appease one passenger without upsetting the other. But her indecision only made things worse. More voices in the cabin joined in now, some siding with David, others whispering to their neighbors about entitled people. David's patience was thinning. He leaned forward slightly, his voice quiet but firm, the kind of tone that made people stop and listen. I'm not moving. I've dealt with this kind of thing before, always being asked to step aside, to take the lesser option, to make it easy for everyone else while my dignity gets checked at the door. Not today, Caroline scoffed, but there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes now. She glanced at Kelly, expecting backup. Kelly opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the captain's voice boomed over the intercom, announcing final boarding and reminding everyone to take their seats quickly. The timing was perfect and terrible, because the cabin wasn't settling. It was simmering. But what came next was the moment David decided this wasn't going to be just another slight he let slide. It was going to be the turning point. Kelly, still standing awkwardly in the aisle, tapped her earpiece and whispered something to another crew member at the front. Within seconds, a second attendant arrived, a tall man with neatly trimmed hair and the kind of smile that seemed more rehearsed than genuine. His name tag read Mark. What's going on here? He asked, lowering his voice, but still loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Kelly gestured between David and Caroline. There's a seating mix-up. She's in 2A, but it actually belongs to him. Mark glanced at David, then at Caroline, then back at David again. His smile tightened. Sir, if you wouldn't mind taking 3C for today, we can get this plane moving. We really don't want to delay departure. David blinked. You're asking me to move? Even after checking both tickets? Mark kept his tone even. It's just one seat back. You'll still have the same service. Caroline leaned back in 2A, her arms crossed like she had already won. Exactly. He's making this harder than it needs to be. David's jaw flexed. He inhaled through his nose, forcing calm into his voice. Do you hear yourself? You're both telling me to give up my seat, the seat I paid for, because she refuses to move. That's not solving the problem. That's rewarding it. A ripple went through the cabin again. Whispers. A few passengers shook their heads. One man near the bulkhead muttered, That's messed up. Mark raised his palms slightly. Sir, please. We're just trying to de-escalate the situation. If you could help us out. David cut him off. No, I'm not helping by letting someone else disrespect me. I've helped enough in my life by staying quiet when I shouldn't have. Not today, Kelly shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Langston, if you'll just... David interrupted again, louder this time, so the whole first-class cabin could hear. No, you keep asking me to bend, but you haven't once asked her to take responsibility. Why? Silence. Mark glanced at Kelly. Kelly looked at Caroline. Caroline rolled her eyes dramatically, as though she were the victim of an unreasonable man making a scene. David turned slightly, addressing the passengers now. You all see what's happening, right? She takes my seat. They confirm it's mine, but instead of asking her to move, they want me to back down. How many times has this happened? How many times do people like me get told to stay quiet, keep it smooth, don't rock the boat? The cabin grew still. A woman 2 rows back called out, He's right. This is ridiculous. Another added, Give the man his seat. Caroline flushed, but she didn't move. I'm not the bad guy here, she snapped. I booked first class like everyone else. Maybe there's a glitch in their system. David shook his head slowly. No glitch. Just entitlement. Mark exhaled, trying to keep his smile, but it was slipping. Sir, please lower your voice. David looked him dead in the eye. No, I've lowered my voice too many times. For a long beat, no one moved. The engines hummed softly outside, boarding announcements continued faintly from the terminal, but inside that cabin, everything hinged on what happened next. Kelly leaned toward Mark, whispering, We need to call the captain. David heard her. He set his carry-on gently in the overhead compartment, slid his jacket off, and took a seat, right in 2A. Caroline gasped, indignant. You can't just... David raised a hand. Watch me. But this wasn't just about a seat anymore. It was about what David chose to do next, and how one decision would flip the entire flight on its head. The air in first class was tense. Caroline's voice pierced it like a needle. This is unacceptable. He just sat down in my seat. Are you going to let him get away with that? Mark's jaw tightened. He crouched slightly, speaking to David as though coaxing a child. Sir, if you don't cooperate, we may have to involve the captain. David leaned back in 2A, his seat. His tone was calm, but there was steel in it now. Do what you need to do. I'm not moving. Passengers held their breath. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward, invested in every word. Caroline, flustered, grabbed her phone as if preparing to record the entire thing. David turned his head toward her. Go ahead. Record it. Let's show everyone how this airline treats its paying customers. Caroline's eyes narrowed. You're being aggressive. David laughed softly, not out of humor, but disbelief. Aggressive? For asking to sit in the seat I bought? That's what we call flipping the script. You take what's mine, then call me aggressive for standing my ground. Kelly looked uneasy. She whispered again to Mark. He nodded, then walked briskly toward the cockpit. David knew what was happening. They were about to escalate it further, but that didn't bother him. In fact, he welcomed it. He'd reached his breaking point long before he boarded this flight. Countless meetings where his ideas were stolen. Countless interactions where strangers assumed he couldn't possibly be the one in charge. Countless microaggressions brushed off as jokes. And now, this. Enough. The captain emerged moments later, tall, with salt and pepper hair and an air of authority that silenced the whispers in the cabin. His name tag read, Captain Reynolds. He approached slowly, scanning the scene. What seems to be the problem? Mark jumped in quickly. Sir, we have a seating dispute. The gentleman is refusing to take 3C. The lady insists she's in 2A. The captain's eyes flicked to David, then to Caroline, then to Kelly. He crossed his arms. Boarding passes. Both David and Caroline handed theirs over. The captain studied them carefully. Then he looked up. Seat 2A belongs to Mr. Langston. David gave a small nod. Finally, someone had spoken the obvious truth, but Caroline wasn't finished. This is ridiculous. I always sit here. He could just move one row back. Why can't he cooperate? Captain Reynolds handed the passes back, his voice firm. Because it's not his job to fix your mistake. It's yours to move. Gasps and murmurs of approval rippled through the cabin. David felt a flicker of relief, but it didn't last, because Caroline leaned forward, lowering her voice as though she were confiding in the captain. Are you really going to let him cause a scene? Think of the other passengers. We'll be late. David caught every word. His chest tightened again, but not from anger this time, from clarity. This wasn't just about her. It wasn't just about one flight attendant's hesitation. It was about a system that always asked him to compromise, him to move aside, him to shrink for the sake of everyone else's comfort. He stood up slowly, drawing every eye in the cabin. His voice was steady, carrying the weight of years of silence. You know what? If this plane can't leave on time because people refuse to acknowledge something as simple as the truth, then it won't leave at all. Not until this is handled properly. The captain frowned. Sir, David cut in, I'm not asking. I'm telling you, you're not taking off until the people in charge of this airline address this. Because I'm not just a passenger. I'm one of your investors, and I'm tired of being treated like I don't belong in spaces I've earned. The words landed heavy. Passengers whispered louder now, phones raised, cameras recording. Caroline's face went pale. Kelly's smile had vanished completely. Even Captain Reynolds looked caught between protocol and shock. David lowered himself back into 2A, calm as ever. So go ahead. Call whoever you need to call, but this flight isn't leaving until it's handled the right way. But with David drawing that line, the pressure in the cabin only built higher, and now the entire flight was caught in the crossfire. The first-class cabin buzzed now, not with idle chatter, but with the sharp energy of conflict. Phones were out, screens glowing as passengers started recording. Whatever happened here wasn't staying in the cabin. It was about to live online forever. A man across the aisle, wearing a navy blazer and glasses, spoke up. He's right. That's his seat. Why are we even debating this? A woman further back added, this wouldn't even be a conversation if the roles were reversed. Caroline turned toward them, eyes wide. Excuse me? Are you implying something about me? The woman didn't flinch. I'm saying the truth is written on that boarding pass and everyone can see it. You're the one dragging this out. Caroline's cheeks flushed. She clutched her phone tighter. This is harassment. He's making a spectacle out of nothing, David spoke, his tone even. Nothing? You're sitting in the seat I bought. You refuse to move. Then the staff asked me to give up what's mine to keep the peace. That's not nothing. That's the same pattern I've seen my whole life. His words hung heavy in the air. Some nodded, some whispered to their neighbors. Captain Reynolds shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Langston, I understand your frustration, but... David raised a hand, cutting him off. With respect, Captain, don't tell me you understand. If you understood, we wouldn't be here right now. The silence that followed was sharp, only broken when a younger passenger in economy leaned forward, voice carrying from behind the curtain. Yo, give him his seat already. We're all trying to get home. Laughter and murmurs rippled through economy, but first class stayed tense. Caroline straightened her blazer and looked around. Realizing she was losing sympathy fast, Kelly tried again, her voice softer now. Mr. Langston, please, we're just trying to get this flight underway. David turned his gaze on her. And I'm trying to make sure it's done right. If I let this go, what message does it send? That money can buy respect for some, but others have to beg for it? That rules bend for convenience, but not for fairness? More heads nodded. A man near the galley muttered, He's got a point. Caroline scoffed. This is ridiculous. You're acting like some kind of hero over a chair. David looked at her steadily. No, I'm acting like someone who's tired of being told his comfort matters less than someone else's convenience. And if you think it's just about a chair, then you haven't been listening. Passengers exchanged glances. The tide had shifted. He wasn't just another annoyed traveler now. He was a man forcing everyone on that plane to confront something bigger. The captain sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. He knew this wasn't going away quietly. All right, I'm calling operations, he muttered, disappearing back into the cockpit. Caroline slumped in her seat, refusing to move, her pride holding her hostage. David leaned back, calm but unyielding. He'd drawn his line, and he wasn't moving it. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The cabin door was still open. Boarding was complete, but the plane wasn't pushing back. A murmur ran through the passengers as the delay dragged on. Some grumbled about missing connections. Others whispered that this was history in the making. A few cheered David quietly, like teammates supporting a captain. Finally, the intercom crackled. Captain Reynolds' voice echoed overhead. Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a delay. Please remain seated. We'll update you shortly. Gasps filled the cabin. David's eyes stayed forward, steady. He had done exactly what he said, grounded the flight. But the real showdown was still to come, because airline management wasn't about to let this play out without stepping in. The cabin door swung open again, and two new figures stepped inside. They weren't flight attendants. They weren't pilots. They were from the airline's ground operations, management. One was a woman in a navy pantsuit with a badge clipped to her pocket. The other, a man with a tablet tucked under his arm, eyes sharp and already scanning the situation. The woman spoke first. Good evening, I'm Angela Ruiz, operations manager for Delta here in Phoenix. We've been made aware of a dispute involving seat assignments. We're here to resolve this quickly. Caroline perked up, straightening as though salvation had arrived. Finally! Thank you. This man has been refusing to move. He's holding up the whole plane. Angela didn't respond right away. She held out her hand. Boarding passes, please. David handed his over without hesitation. Caroline, a beat slower, did the same. Angela compared them, then raised her eyes. Seat 2A belongs to Mr. Langston. Seat 3C belongs to Ms. Whitmore. The cabin exhaled. Passengers murmured again, this time louder. Some clapped softly. Caroline's face flushed red. Still, she wasn't giving in. That can't be right. I booked this seat. There has to be a mistake in your system. Angela's tone sharpened. The system is not mistaken. Mr. Langston's ticket is valid. You are in the wrong seat, Caroline sputtered, her words tumbling. But I've flown this route before. I always sit here. I shouldn't have to move. Angela folded her arms. Miss Whitmore, you will need to move to your assigned seat. Now Caroline froze. Her pride battled with reality, but the weight of dozens of eyes burning into her back was undeniable. David watched her silently, not gloating, just steady. The man with the tablet finally spoke. For the record, Mr. Langston is also a shareholder in this airline. His account is flagged as high value. So not only was he disrespected, but this situation could have been avoided if staff had handled it properly. Kelly's face went pale. Mark looked down at the floor. Angela continued, voice carrying authority. This delay has cost the airline thousands already. This is unacceptable. Miss Whitmore, move to your assigned seat immediately, or we will remove you from the flight. A wave of murmurs swept through the cabin. Phones recorded every word. Caroline's face crumpled between rage and humiliation. She clutched her bag, muttering under her breath as she finally stood and shuffled back to row 3. Passengers applauded softly. A few clapped louder, turning the moment into a quiet victory. David didn't smile. He didn't clap. He simply adjusted his jacket, sat comfortably in 2A, and looked out the window. Angela turned to him. Mr. Langston, on behalf of Delta, we deeply apologize. This should never have happened. David met her eyes. You're right. It shouldn't have, but it did, and I want to make sure your people learn something from it. Angela nodded firmly. They will. She shot a look at Kelly and Mark, who both shifted uncomfortably. With that, Angela and the man with the tablet exited the plane. The cabin door closed. The engines revved. Passengers settled, buzzing with the story they'd all carry long after landing. But as the plane finally prepared to take off, the lesson of that night wasn't about seats or delays. It was about what happens when one man refuses to shrink in the face of disrespect. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane pushed back from the gate. The tension that had filled the air for nearly half an hour slowly gave way to a tired but buzzing energy. People whispered, some still shaking their heads at what they had just witnessed. Others, phones in hand, tapped furiously, no doubt uploading clips to social media before the plane even left the ground. David sat quietly in 2A, gazing out the window as Phoenix disappeared beneath him. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. But there was a calmness inside him, a steadiness he hadn't felt in a long time. He hadn't just claimed a seat. He had claimed his dignity in front of strangers who now couldn't unsee the truth. Caroline, 3 feet behind him in 3C, stayed silent. The earlier bravado had drained from her face. Every so often she shifted in her seat, but she never spoke another word. She didn't have to. The lesson wasn't for her alone. It was for everyone who had watched the way a simple situation spiraled because people were too willing to excuse the wrong person. Hours later, as the plane landed in Dallas, David gathered his things calmly. Passengers stopped him as he walked down the aisle. "Good on you, man," one said, clapping his shoulder. "You spoke for a lot of us tonight," another added. David nodded politely, offering only a quiet, "Thank you." He didn't need applause. He needed change. Outside the terminal, he pulled out his phone and drafted an email. Not to friends, not to family, but directly to the board of directors of the airline where his voice carried weight. He wasn't asking for an apology. He was demanding accountability, training, structural changes. Because if it happened to him, it could happen to someone else who didn't have the platform to fight back. This wasn't about a chair in the sky. It was about respect, fairness, and the courage to stand firm when it's easier to stay silent. The truth is, life will hand you moments where shrinking feels safe, but standing tall is necessary. Where giving in keeps the peace, but drawing a line changes the game. David's decision to say, "not today," grounded more than just a plane. It grounded an entire room of people in the reality that respect must be given where it's due. And that's the takeaway. Sometimes the fight isn't about what's in front of you. It's about everything that came before it and everything that will come after. So the next time you're faced with a situation where you know you're in the right, ask yourself, will you shrink to make others comfortable, or will you stand, calmly but firmly, for what's yours? If this story made you think, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Respect shouldn't be optional, and silence shouldn't be the price of peace.